Let's picture the start of 1942. To put it mildly, America was reeling. The shock of Pearl Harbor had shaken the country to its core. And in the months that followed, well, the news just kept getting worse. It felt like defeat after defeat. But here's the thing. Within just 1 year, everything was about to change. So that leads us to the big question, right? How did it happen? I mean, this was a global catastrophe, a war on a scale nobody had ever seen. How does a nation go from being completely on the ropes to suddenly landing knockout blows? Well, the answer, it all comes down to the events of this one single year. 1942 was a total roller coaster, a year of unbelievable lows and just staggering highs. It was the year that the momentum of the entire war finally started to shift. To really get how huge this turnaround was, you first have to understand just how bleak things looked at the start. And believe me, in early 1942, things were bad. Nowhere was the situation more grim for American forces than in the Pacific. For months, you've got American and Filipino soldiers fighting side by side in a brutal, losing battle against the invading Japanese army. They get pushed back to the Bataan Peninsula, and they're literally starving, they're sick. And the worst part? No help is coming. They were completely cut off. You can just feel that the end is near. And then, in April, the inevitable happened. 75,000 Allied troops were forced to lay down their arms. I mean, just let that number sink in. It was the largest single surrender in American military history. But for those men, the battle might have been over, but their nightmare was just getting started. What came next was something straight out of a horror film. These soldiers, who are already completely worn down from months of fighting, were forced to march. And not just a short walk. We're talking 65 miles through the sweltering jungle to a prisoner of war camp. This became known as the Bataan Death March, and it was exactly as horrible as it sounds. Thousands died from starvation, from disease, from the sheer brutality of it all. For the United States, this was it. This was rock bottom, a moment of just total national despair. But sometimes it's in those darkest moments that something unexpected happens. Literally, just days after the surrender at Bataan, America decided, no, we're not done. It was time to hit back. And in a way, nobody saw coming. Now, this wasn't some huge invasion force. Nope, this was something way, way gutsier. A bombing raid directly on Tokyo. And get this, it was launched from an aircraft carrier way out in the ocean, something most military minds at the time thought was completely impossible. Okay, so this becomes known as the Doolittle Raid. And in terms of actual physical damage, honestly, not much. But that wasn't the point at all. The real impact here was psychological. For Japan, it was a massive shock. It completely shattered that idea that their homeland was untouchable. And for Americans back home, man, hearing that U.S. bombs had fallen on Tokyo, it was like a lightning bolt of hope, right when they needed it most. So the Doolittle Raid was a huge morale victory, for sure. But let's be real, the strategic situation in the Pacific was still pretty bad. Japan was gearing up for one more huge attack. Their goal? Wipe out the U.S. fleet for good. This was shaping up to be the decisive battle of the Pacific War. The Japanese Imperial Navy put together this enormous fleet. The plan was simple: set a trap, an ambush for the remaining American carriers near a tiny island called Midway. They were absolutely confident they were going to win. But they missed something. The U.S. had an ace up its sleeve. And that secret weapon? It wasn't a new ship or a faster plane. It was intelligence. You see, there was this incredible team of U.S. codebreakers working on a project called MAJOR, and they did what everyone thought couldn't be done. They cracked Japan's naval codes. Think about what that means. They didn't just have a hunch, they knew the entire Japanese battle plan. So, instead of sailing into an ambush, the U.S. Navy, even though it was outnumbered, was able to set a trap of its own. When that huge Japanese fleet arrived at Midway, surprise! The Americans were already there, waiting. In an instant, the hunters became the hunted. And the result? It was just stunning, almost unbelievable. In just a few hours, the U.S. Navy sank 4 of Japan's best aircraft carriers, the very heart of their fleet. Midway wasn't just another battle. It was the first huge, decisive American victory, and it stopped the Japanese advance in the Pacific Cold. Okay, so Midway was monumental. A massive turning point in the Pacific. But you've got to remember, this was a world war, and to truly turn the tide for good, America had to look to the other side of the planet. All right, so by late 1942, with the immediate threat in the Pacific dealt with, the U.S. was finally ready. It was time to open a new front and take the fight directly to the Axis powers in the West. In November, a massive Allied fleet landed American and British troops in North Africa. This was Operation Torch, and it was a really big deal. The first major American ground offensive of the war against German and Italian forces. So you might be asking, why North Africa? Well, the strategy was pretty smart, actually. It opened a second front to take some of the immense pressure off the Soviet Union. It also gave the Allies a foothold to eventually invade Italy, what they called the soft underbelly of Europe. And it gave them bases for bombing raids against targets in occupied France. It was all connected. And just like that, you can see all the pieces starting to click into place. That second half of 1942, it saw a complete 180. The whole momentum of the war shifted, and it shifted fast, all across the globe. Just look at this timeline. It really shows you the new pace of the war. You've got the huge defensive win at Midway in June. Then boom. Just 2 months later in August, the U.S. goes on offense, with Marines hitting the beaches at Guadalcanal. Then boom again in November, Operation Torch kicks off a whole new front. They weren't just reacting anymore, they were seizing the initiative. Just think back to where we started this story. The absolute desperation of Bataan, that feeling of being on the defensive everywhere. And now, by the end of this 1 year, American forces are on the attack in the jungles of the Pacific and the deserts of North Africa. The whole dynamic had flipped. And really, that's the bottom line. 1942 was the year America took the enemy's best shot, got right back on its feet, and started landing its own powerful blows. The conversation totally changed. It was no longer a question of if the Allies could win, but how. The tide had turned, there's no doubt about it. But the fighting was so far from over. This raises an even harder question. What would be the ultimate cost of that victory? The road ahead was going to be long, bloody, and incredibly difficult. 1942 was just the beginning.